during this time where I realized, oh my gosh, I've been masking for most of my life. I was so sensitive to all of the judgment and criticism that comes with being me as like a neurodivergent person, and that I really made myself really small, and I made myself into something that other people wanted me to be. And I went into autopilot for a long time and wasn't even fully aware of it. It's not that I was never doing anything that felt good, that I liked, but I wasn't enjoying that stuff through the lens of actually me, who I was. I was trying to enjoy it through the lens of other people looking at me. So I was still doing it in a certain way. And so I'm kind of like trying to rediscover all of my hobbies right now and let myself rediscover who I really am without the lens of others on top of that, without worrying about what other people are going to think of what I'm doing.
If insight is a destination, curiosity is the map. I'm Clayton, and this is Making Insight, where we connect the dots between growth, creativity, and what drives us forward. Thank you for being here, Kim. This is Making Insight, episode 10. You are my 10th episode.
Exciting.
Yeah. If
Thank
you
you for
wouldn't
having me.
mind, of course, I'm excited about whatever it is we're going to dive into today. If you wouldn't mind, just give the audience a brief introduction to yourself, and we'll go from there.
Sure. My name is Kimberly Bates. I am a longtime marketing and creative leader, about 20 years now. While that's a passion, marketing, branding, creative, I'm also an artist, fine artist. You can see some of my stuff in the background here if you're watching live. But I am also very, very passionate about psychology and just spreading good information that I feel is missing in the world and helping people to have a little bit more awareness about mental health, neurodivergence, especially in the workplace, things that happen that everybody can kind of be a little bit more aware of, that will make everyone a little bit more mindful and maybe empathetic towards each other. So yeah, I'm excited to talk today.
Definitely. I don't even know where to begin. So I'm just going to gauge what you're feeling. Do you want to walk down the baby steps into 3 feet water, or should we jump off the diving board and go straight into the deep end?
Sure. Well, I mean, I know, when we had talked a while back, you had mentioned like not even really being super familiar with the word neurodivergence, or kind of like it was something you said you heard, but you just weren't like super familiar with it. What's your understanding of it?
My understanding isn't too much, other than most of the times that I have come across that word, it has been around women sharing some sort of experience that they've had with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think when we had our chat and you had mentioned that, it was interesting because I had just come off a conference where I was on a panel and we got on the topic of neurodivergence in the workplace. And I have late diagnosed ADHD as a woman. I am no guru. So I'll just preface everything with that as like, I am not a guru. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist, anything like that. But I have always, like I mentioned before, had just this long-standing love of psychology and understanding myself, doing personal growth. And so, whenever I kind of run up into something going on in my life where I just feel like, gosh, something's off with me, something's not quite right, I feel like something's going on health-wise or mental health-wise, I just tend to do a deep dive into all these subjects, trying to figure out what's going on. So I'm reading hundreds of books, listening to tons of podcasts, like truly, truly going down the rabbit hole. Like that's my hobby. So I don't know, maybe in that I'd be a good person to listen to, but just again, the disclaimer, like there's plenty of gurus out there that people can go check out. Yeah. In terms of neurodivergence, when I was on this conference, on this panel talking about it, there were a lot of people in the audience from the East Coast and just different places around the United States and even actually Europe as well. And they kind of had the same reaction you did. They're like, wait, hold on, stop. Like, cause I was on a roll, right? I was talking about neurodivergence going into it. They're like, what is this? And I really do forget that I live in California. Some of this vocabulary is so common here, and I forget that I'm maybe in a little bit of a bubble. So I appreciate being able to bring a little bit of that awareness to people. So neurodivergence in a nutshell is you are born with your brain function is atypical from a neurotypical, which is exactly what it sounds like. A neurotypical, you're in the majority of brain function, the way that your brain is supposed to work, the way neurotransmitters are produced, not produced, the way they're received by your receptors, not received. A neurotypical is in the majority of the way people operate. If you are neurodivergent, you're in the minority. So also with that said, you can kind of anticipate that as more people get diagnosed potentially with neurodivergence, we may actually find that we're about 50-50. We might not actually be a minority majority, but at the moment it's minority.
Is that type A, type B personality, or is that different from what you just said?
Definitely different. Definitely different. However, there's a lot of there's a lot of crossover, right? It's like that how we like to say type B personality. You might have ADHD if you're a type A or type B. You might or you might not. They could coincide, but it's not like it's kind of like that Venn diagram, right? It's not an absolute.
What was the trigger for you that made you look into having ADHD? Did that come from something you realized on your own, or did you just go see a doctor and the doctor was like, you may have ADHD or neurodivergence?
Honestly, my story is a little funny. It's a little weird. It was kind of none of that. There are things about myself, which this is kind of the part that is good to get into, because it's like, this is the part where I think, if somebody was listening and heard me kind of describe these weird scenarios that I had when I was a kid, then that's what they're going to be like, oh my God, me too. And then, they might think this is a thing that they might want to go look into. Before I get into all the childhood stuff that I experienced, that I kind of had to go back and clock a bunch of things. I had gone through quite a long period, longer than I'm used to, of unemployment. I would say, and part of that was me leaving a job with, the very toxic environment at this job. There was a lot of things going on that switched all of a sudden. I had been there for a while, and then all of a sudden it was great, and then it wasn't, right? And it was time for me to leave. And at first I took some time off. But once I decided that I wanted to go back to work and I was ready to return and ready to go look for a job, I quite literally felt like my body was stopping me from looking for a job. Like I was having almost like trauma reactions to just trying to get on the computer and look at job posts, like kind of sift through things, go through those motions of what you do to get a job. I was literally having anxiety attacks. All of a sudden, it kind of hit me. And this was something that I had never experienced before, at least to that extreme. I had experienced it before, but not to that extreme. And there was clearly something going on. Now, I had a lot of other traumatic things happen in my life in the last, year and a half, like losing loved ones, like quite a few, actually. There's a lot of stress in my life. So I just had doctors keep telling me, oh, you're just really stressed. You're going through grief. This is natural. This is normal. Just give yourself a break. Just chill out for a while. Let yourself rest. Don't put pressure on yourself to do this thing, and you'll be fine after a while. And so I said, okay. And I did that, and it really didn't improve, and it just kept getting worse. And one day I was taking a nap, and I was listening to one of my other podcasts that I just enjoy, and I fell asleep listening to this podcast. And little did I know that Spotify would start playing other podcasts it thinks I would enjoy based on what I already listened to. And I woke up like an hour and a half later, hearing this woman's voice talk about all of these things that were like, this woman is talking about me. What? Like she literally was describing every struggle I had ever had in my life and like currently. And I just was like, it was really one of those moments where I was like coming to, and couple minutes in, I was like, oh, okay. 5 minutes in, I was like, oh my God, what is this? 10 minutes in, I was like, I have to know what this podcast is about. And it was about ADHD and women, late diagnosed ADHD. And so that was really the big aha moment of, oh my God, which brought it all together. So I proceeded to listen to every single episode of that podcast and then go find all of these other ones. And it's been kind of history since there. I'm in the process of getting a formal diagnosis now so that, I have, for those people who need the credibility when I talk about this, like, but I 100% know that I do that. Like, there's no doubt in my mind, given all the things that have fallen into place since then.
Very interesting, because I know for me, I went through a period in high school where I asked my doctor if I had it, more so along the lines to get a study drug. What was it, Vyvanse at the time? And it's not like I was
Mm,
taking that. I only took it while I was prescribed from my doctor. But
mm,
that was the only period where somebody told me I had ADHD. And I feel like since then, I've gone through a period where there's moments where I feel like I experience certain symptoms of ADHD, but there's
mhm,
also a part of me that refuses to attach ADHD to my identity. Does
mhm,
that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it really does. And that's actually an incredible tie into something that I feel very strongly about. I think like there's varying degrees of this, right? I mean, I really do believe that your lifestyle, like whether you're dealing with trauma, whether you're dealing with grief in the moment, like whether you're going through a really stressful time in your life, whether you're going through a really happy time, all of that can exacerbate or lessen the symptoms, right? So it actually makes a lot of sense why I've always kind of dealt with these things. Like, it's not like all of a sudden in the middle of the pandemic, and in the middle of my grief of dealing with personal loss, and not having a job. It's like all these stressful things, right? It's not like all of a sudden I was like, oh, I have ADHD and I've never experienced these symptoms before. I had definitely experienced these symptoms for a long time. It was just significantly worse to the point where it was causing so much distress in my life that I could not function, which, when that kind of thing happens, that's usually when people need resistance, right? People need like, sometimes to hit rock bottom or that extreme situation to like get themselves off their butt and figure out, okay, what for once and for all, right? What's going on, right? So, to your point, like, so what you're just saying is like a really good tie into kind of what my parents knew when I was a kid. I have memories of getting tested, like going through cognitive tests when I was right around kindergarten, first grade, second grade, which is a super common time period for kids to get diagnosed with ADHD, especially boys. But yet, when I remembered those tests, like when I was a teenager, when I was 12, 13, 14, and asked my parents, they had told me, oh, it was just a test to see if you're an audio or visual learner. And I have since come to find out that, yes, technically that's what the tests were, but they actually were noticing things about me that were different, that were not like the other kids. And that was actually the bigger reason for pursuing those tests at the time. I remember my mom had told me, oh, everybody in the school did it. They all got this test. And it wasn't, right. I believe that it came from their desire to not want to label me as different and potentially like make things harder on me in my life. And totally get that, right? There's so many people think
What
that
would have
way.
been the
So
solution? Were you treated at that time? It sounds like you weren't treated.
no, no.
What would have been the solution at that time? Taking some sort of substance or maybe
Uh,
different, maybe not even a substance, but a different curriculum in school, perhaps?
that's a really amazing question for a psychiatrist. I would love to know, like, because honestly, I don't know. Because the other thing is about the biggest difference between how ADHD presents in girls versus boys, especially at a young age, is like boys is the typical hyperactive, that physical, like outward hyperactive. They're running around, they can't sit still. That's usually the reason why they struggle in school sometimes. Like, there's all these things that are telltale signs of ADHD, right? And in boys, but in girls, that hyperactivity is more often than not internalized. So it goes into your brain. So you could have, and this was 100% me, 100%. So this is a little girl who looks like, or a little boy, because it's not that I can't happen to boys, right? But it's more internalized. And this is a little kid, or even adult who dissociates a lot, who goes into their head, who looks to be daydreaming a lot, looks like they're not paying attention, but their mind is going a mile a minute and they have got an entire world inside their brain. And there's just like a million like ideas just ping ponging back and forth, and they won't hear you. Like they literally want, when they're in that mode, right? They literally will not hear you. And so that was me. I mean, I
Sounds
remember
like me now.
yeah, yeah, right. I mean, It's wild. I mean, so it's funny because one of the biggest, when I go on discussion groups online, all the people, all the, the professionals, right, that I follow about ADHD online, so many of their comment sections are filled with people just debating why the heck is this thing called ADHD? Like adult hyperactive attention deficit disorder. There is no deficit of attention. We have all the attention in the world. It's more that it's interest based. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the idea of being an audio learner versus a more visual learner. There's different ways that people learn better. There's audio, visual, tactile. And, that's one of the things that, a lot of teachers and learning associations try to take into account when they're designing curriculums in school, right? Like we're getting better at that. But so there's that, right? What kind of learner are you? But there's also this thing of like, what is an actual appropriate name for attention deficit disorder? An important thing for me is to have people understand that because ADHD is especially if you're one of the people who internalizes the hyperactivity instead of externalizes it, it's a relatively invisible diagnosis, right? It's, you can't walk down the street and look at someone and say, oh, you're disabled. You have ADHD, you're disabled. You will never know versus somebody who's missing an arm, right? Like you can just look at somebody and know, oh, they don't have an arm. Therefore they have this challenge. But, we are literally like walking down the street with these challenges and, bringing a little bit more awareness to that and making a very bold statement, but it is true. And this is science backed. It is not a mindset. It is not a lack. ADHD and neurodivergence is not an excuse for a lack of positive mindset or strong mindset around productivity and things like that. This is a literal difference in the way that our brain works. And when it comes to ADHD, specifically dopamine, very simply put, I mean, again, please fact check me and people can go look this up, but because I'm regurgitating so much stuff that I've heard that I know to be true from all these professionals, specialists, but it's a problem with dopamine. Like we do not create and use dopamine the way that a neurotypical does. And dopamine is very oversimplifying, but dopamine is needed in order to perform tasks, period. So it's easy to perform a task that you really, really enjoy because dopamine spikes and you're excited by it. So you've got all this dopamine. And when you've got that rush of dopamine, it makes it really easy for you to perform a task. If you had no dopamine, it would be almost impossible. It would feel almost impossible for you to perform a task. So that's why I mentioned before, a lot on these discussion boards, there's a lot of talk about if we had to rename ADHD, what would it be? And there's a lot of interesting, I haven't landed on one totally yet, but there's a lot of interesting ones like interest-based attention dopamine disorder. Something like that. But it's interest-based attention. And it's all because of where the dopamine floods in and then totally disappears.
And from my understanding, it shouldn't be something that's looked at as a disability, because once you have the awareness that it's something that impacts you, it's what do I now need to change to actually turn it into a strength rather than a weakness.
Oh yeah, for sure. And we do need it. I mean, this is why I personally, totally my speculation, I personally believe that the more light that gets shown on this subject matter, the more people become aware of what this actually is and maybe pursue a diagnosis or even self-diagnose. That's okay. Like if you know, you know. So once that happens, I do actually believe that the world is much more 50-50 and that this is a very copacetic relationship that we have between neurotypical and neurodivergent people. Right now, it is absolutely my opinion that the biggest reason it's kind of dubbed as a disability is because of corporate and the way that capitalism has kind of defined the workplace and set up the workplace for profit versus maybe slowing down a little bit, taking a little bit more time for innovation, taking risks. And, when our number one priority is money, then...
And developing culture and people.
Yeah. We tend to set up workplaces for maximum efficiency and treating people like machines. And that's something that, like behaving as a machine and doing monotonous work all day long, if you have a steady flow of regulated dopamine, you can do that. You actually have the stamina to do that kind of work. A person that doesn't can literally not do work in that environment and do work that way. They need different types of stimulation. They need different things to keep them interested.
What is something you've changed in your own life ever since you became aware that this impacts you?
The biggest thing that changed at first was just a lot of relief. I mean, listening to all the stories, once I got it in my head of, oh, ADHD, and like really turned my attention to that, to learning all about it. It's the first thing I've ever discovered in my life where when I turned my attention on that and started learning all about it, because I've done this with plenty of other disorders and different things, because I've been on this path, right? Trying to figure out what's going on with me and what's different, what's off, and how can I maximize. And once I found ADHD, everything made sense. Like everything just clicked into place. Like all of a sudden memories from my childhood, like all these different scenarios I found myself in just came flooding back in. And it was like, oh, that's what it is. Like, I feel like I finally found my people. It was like, got it. Yep, totally. This is it. So that was the first thing, was just kind of sitting back and relaxing, of like taking a deep breath and having like a mini mental celebration of, yay, I figured it out, you know? But then I got mad. I also got mad because,
Really?
yeah, I think this kind of goes back to the desire for people not to label, or kind of want to avoid potential, for parents maybe to ignore it and just be like, oh, we're just going to treat our kid like she's normal, and we're just going to treat her like nothing's going on, and as if that would manifest nothing going on. But I mean, it doesn't really work that way. Like, and I think that's the part that really, like our belief that some of these mental disorders, or like mental, I shouldn't say disorder, but mental differences are something that's just a matter of like mind over matter, right? Just buck up and suck it up and figure out how to think differently. It's really not a matter of that. Like, and you wouldn't do that to person. Like, again, if you saw a person missing an arm, just because you treat them like a person who has an arm doesn't mean they're suddenly going to grow an arm back, right? Like that doesn't happen. And it's the same with ADHD, and it's the same with like a lot of these mental disorders or differences, these neurodivergences. It's just the way that our brain works. I really do feel like that's the first hurdle, honestly, just in general and society, is getting people to understand that, because I run into people every day who really don't. They don't understand it because they haven't experienced it, right?
I recently read somebody who posted in the past week in the business community that I follow that he was just diagnosed with late stage adulthood ADHD, and he was talking about his experience. And what I thought was unique in that was I just pulled it up here, but he included a chat GPT prompt that you could input. I don't know if you use chat GPT at all, but a chat GPT prompt that you could input and let it give you an introductory diagnosis. It's not saying you should rely on it, but take this diagnosis and from what it tells you, go see a doctor based on what it says.
That's cool.
But yeah, that is something I can probably share your way and maybe even include.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT. It's very, I mean, I know there's so much controversy about it, and especially when it comes to the professionals, right? The doctors and psychiatrists like tend to freak out and be like, no, don't let it diagnose you. And it's like,
of course.
Okay, but it's a good tool to bounce ideas off of and like put new ideas in your head that are threads that are worth pulling on. It's not that you need to take it for its word exactly, but you don't know what you don't know until you start exploring and having the conversation.
Definitely. And what you just said is something that went through my mind as I read this. I'm like, wow, this is pretty incredible. Like, this is a use case for ChatGPT that doesn't seem like it's just cheating your way through a job or.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to read it really quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Act as a clinician conducting a pre-assessment for ADHD. Ask me structured, clinically relevant questions to explore my symptoms, history, and their impact on my life. Cover core symptoms such as inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, their effect on daily life, such as work, relationships, and self-care, medical and family history, lifestyle factors, sleep, diet, stress, coping strategies, and how long-term symptoms have persisted. Summarize my responses into a professional document I can share with the clinician.
Awesome.
So yeah,
awesome.
I haven't done it yet, but I will have to try that out probably sometime after this episode.
Yeah.
Notice
I
that.
have actually used ChatGPT in a really similar way, even for results of like if you go to the doctor and let's say you have a bunch of like blood labs taken for something and um you know or maybe you have an X-ray or a CT scan or for whatever reason, right? And they give you the report and all of the language is very, very medical. And you're like, I don't know what any of these words mean. And yeah, I've used it for that before too. And it's worth noting too that like telling it to act as a clinician versus a Western medicine doctor versus a functional medicine doctor will give you different results because certain types of doctors will go deeper into things and maybe be a little bit like holistic wellness oriented, and they would interpret those results a bit differently. So it's interesting to play around with that and see kind of like what you get based on the prompt. But it's been super helpful for me. And I've had a lot of success dealing with some actually pretty big health stuff this year with the help. I mean, we all need advocates, people on our side helping us and arming us with knowledge so that when we do go into our doctor, like we can make the most of that 12 minutes that we get now, right? So it's helpful.
I know last time we spoke, you also mentioned, I think that nutrition is something that you hold high value to.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
nutrition something tied in with ADHD and the effects ADHD can have on a person or perhaps you individually?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, everybody obviously is different, but there are a lot of different supplements, different nutrients and things that, that help a lot with it can help a lot with ADHD, but then again, it's very personal in terms of like like omega 3s is one of them, right? It's very nourishing to your brain. And so that's one thing that's always brought up. You can go Google it and you'll find that answer within the supplement list everywhere. But whether you need 1,000 milligrams a day or 3,000, I mean, that's personal, right? So you got to play with that. But yeah, there's definitely stuff like that.
There were a couple books that were important to you. Now It All Makes Sense by Alex Partridge. Women with Attention Deficit Disorder by Sari Golden. Are those reliable resources that you would recommend to anybody listening to this to go look into themselves? Or if not them, are there any others that you would recommend?
Yeah. So, well, first off, I really do believe that like having something to relate to and understanding why you believe you have attention deficit disorder is the first step, right? So that's more of why. So especially Alex Partridge's work, the podcast ADHD Chatter has been wildly helpful for me. He does such a phenomenal job at interviewing so many people that have been diagnosed with ADHD. He does interview many people with ADHD, but that have been diagnosed at various points in their life. But he does a really lovely job at advocating for late diagnosed women because it is such a problem because shedding some light on just the fact that like in general, medical world has been pretty much solely based on the studies of men. There's not very many studies that actually included women until the 90s. So, which is wild. So wild to think that there's like just women that have been left out of all sorts of studies because we were deemed too unpredictable because, our hormones and our menstrual cycles made our bodies, go fluctuate, internally too much so that they wouldn't be able to get a solid read. And it's like, what the heck? We're 50% of the population. Like, it's worth studying, right? So, and ADHD is just one more thing that was primarily based on how it presented in boys versus girls.
When you say late diagnosed, does that mean you're carrying it around your whole life, or is it possible you developed it late in your life? Maybe both.
So ADHD is genetic. 100% is genetic. Neurodivergence is genetic. Now, if you had a wonderful childhood and your parents were perfect and they just were crazy supportive of you and you just did not experience any trauma whatsoever, you theoretically go throughout your life not really having that much of an issue with the symptoms of ADHD. It's not that they wouldn't be there, it's that you wouldn't find them that much of a hindrance to your life. But as we know, that scenario I painted isn't really realistic.
There's trauma everywhere, and by trauma it's not necessarily your house burning down. It could be minor things like people honking at you
Sure.
on the highway, or very minor incidents that that
Yeah.
our
How you
nervous
deal with
system.
stress, how sensitive you are. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it. But one thing in general, I mean, I know that there's like Gabor Mate is somebody that he's an incredibly wise man. I love a lot of the things that he says. And there are some things he brings up. I believe, hopefully I'm not misquoting, but I believe he's been on podcasts and recordings before stating that ADHD is actually caused by trauma. Even if he didn't say that, I know there are people out there who believe that it's exacerbated by trauma. Absolutely. There may be people who have ADHD who never really presented with a whole lot of symptoms, like, or didn't seem to really be hindered by them, that then went through a trauma and were suddenly in a period of their life dealing with a lot of trauma and suddenly ADHD. They just appeared to be this crazy ADHD person all of a sudden, right? That happens for sure. But without that already going on, without that neurodivergence, it's not going to shift like that unless it's already there. And that's something that science has proven over and over. So that's part of why it's like there's a lot of talk about trauma. I'm all about healing trauma. I'm all about it. That's also just part of like self-care for someone with ADHD. It's going to be more important for somebody with ADHD to really take care of their trauma, because the other thing that kind of happens, I mean, something that Alex Partridge, talks about on his podcast, and his Instagram is wonderful, like just for like little snippets of examples of, how ADHD shows up. And it's like this thing where it takes over in those moments, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to go.
No, this is
Down there.
an interesting pathway that we can go into a little bit more. I know I talked about it with my guest Sasha. I'm releasing his episode later this week. He's a transformational coach, and similar to Carlene, who you introduced me to.
Yeah.
The way trauma gets stored in our body
Mm-hmm.
and can linger there for a significant amount of time if we're not aware of it. Do you think that is important to be aware of for people with ADHD?
Yeah.
You mentioned you're somebody, or whether it be you or people with ADHD, you're internalizing your ADHD, or your
Yeah.
ADHD is internalized. So does that mean the trauma you experience is also internalized?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think any trauma that you don't, well, I should say my hyperactivity is definitely in my head. It's definitely internalized, but that doesn't mean the hyperactivity is bad, right? I mean, hyperactivity could be daydreaming about, unicorns and rainbows and gumdrops and everything wonderful. And you're just having this party in your head and it might feel amazing, and that's not traumatic. It's just that's internalized, right? Everybody, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the book, The Body Keeps Score. It's a fantastic book. I'm so happy that it gets referenced more and more often. I feel like everybody should read that book. It 100% does. I've experienced it myself. Any emotion or trauma, any emotion really that we don't process, any negative emotion that we do not process, whether it's crying when something sad happens, if we stop ourselves from crying, if we're really, really upset and all we want to do is scream, but we stop ourselves from doing that, it stays in our body and it manifests in all sorts of different ways, right? And so that is important to work out of your body. And I mean, the reason I think that it's even, I think, more important, not that it's not so important for everybody to do that, but it's why it's more important for people with neurodivergence and ADHD to pay attention to that, is because this is what Alex Partridge mentions on his podcast a lot, is that people with ADHD tend to have, I don't know where he gets this statistic, but I know he does cite it somewhere. So if you go look at it, it's real. But he says that people with ADHD tend to experience about 20,000 more like negative comments, almost like microaggressions towards them, in their lifetime, in their childhood, than a neurotypical. And the reason for that is, well, we're more difficult. Parents that might be neurotypical or don't have the tools to respond to the way our brains work differently, and they see different behavior coming out of us. They don't know how to deal with that. And so it's coming from them. It's coming from kids on the playground, kids are very smart. Kids are so attuned, and you can smell when someone's different from you. And kids are so mean. Kids can be so mean. So a lot of the times it's really common for neurodivergent people to get bullied. It's common for that. So, when you stack up all of those micro moments in which a neurodivergent person experienced like more of those little micro traumas than the average neurotypical person, you're carrying around a lot more, right? Once you get to adulthood, it's like you've got a lot of unprocessed stuff to deal with.
Stacking onto this, it makes me think about personality types. I know I was looking through your art website and you had listed in there your ENTP.
Wait, am I
ENTP / ENTJ.
Yeah.
I've taken quite a bit of personality tests. I find them pretty fascinating. What has your Myers-Briggs taught you about yourself?
It can definitely shift for sure.
Over the span of your life?
Yeah. But, actually, in context of the conversation we're having about neurodivergence, the biggest thing that I realized after understanding my neurodivergence and understanding my ADHD was I think I need to go take that test again, because the last time that I took it, when I answered those questions, I was answering it through my mask. So people with neurodivergence, ADHD, we tend to mask, especially women. And that's another reason why there's so many late diagnosed women, is because societally, right, for the most part, girls are taught to be good little girls. And if we are hyperactive and if we go nuts and start screaming and acting out, it's a big deal, right? It's like, no, be a good girl. Girls don't scream. Girls aren't loud. When boys do that, it's more accepted, which is why you tend to see more little girls with ADHD internalize it versus little boys. A lot of people, they might get the boys in trouble for being too loud or rambunctious, but for the most part, it's like silly Tommy, like boys will be boys, right? And it gets
makes sense,
kind of accepted, right? But in girls, it's kind of pushed down. So girls learn to mask. Girls learn to mask like really well and really young. And so I think that goes back to, what I mentioned earlier about having a lot of anger, after the relief of, oh, everything makes sense. And this is why my diagnosis, like I had a lot of anger because it was like, wait, do I even know who I am? I haven't even been expressing, like I've been playing this role, not on purpose. Like I'm not trying to be fake. I was never trying to be fake, but I think I accidentally kind of was, because I wasn't, it's maybe extreme people pleaser mode where I was just trying so hard to be what other people wanted me to be, so that like this neurodivergent part of myself wouldn't cause issues in our relationship or in the situation or whatever. But it's exhausting, physically exhausting to do that. So back to your thing about the Myers-Briggs, right? That was another light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, all these personality tests. I think I might have been answering those questions based on how I thought I should answer the question instead of how I actually felt.
That's a really good point. And the last time I took the Myers-Briggs, there was a moment during taking it where I hit the back button a few times, because in the middle of taking it, I'm like, I'm answering these based on my ideal state. What the perfect state Clayton thinks I should be answering this as. Whereas in like, how do I behave? What are my behaviors in these questions?
Yeah.
And I feel like I was much more intrigued with the result, and I found more of a connection with the result that I got.
What made you, so do you feel like that happened after you kind of were you able to sort of put down that mask, or sort of that people pleaser, that thing that drives you to want to answer it perfectly? Or what made you able to put that down and go back and have the awareness to answer it differently?
Definitely the growing self-awareness in kind of unraveling who my true highest version of myself is right now. It's definitely a process. Even in your About Me section, I noticed you had recovering perfectionist. Like that is something that's also showing up in my life. And I was going to bring that up because I'm like, are you still recovering, or have you recovered? Because a few of the podcasts I listen to, they talk from the sense that they're recovered. So I don't know if you're still working through that, can consider yourself still working through that, but I know I am as well. Coming to terms that I believe a lot of my actions and behaviors for 98% of my life has been a result of conditioning or things not necessarily in my control, but I'm now in a place where I can control them more
Yeah.
and work on them more. I think a lot of that also stems from things showing up in my life that like tell me I don't need to do more. I don't need to learn more. Learning more is always great. I'll always be a constant learner. It's just like I don't need to do anything else. It's more like I need to start letting go of things that no longer serve me. And a lot of that isn't necessarily outside of myself. It's inside of myself, helping let go of things to create a safer nervous system.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that. I mean, obviously it can happen in a lot of different ways, but I do believe, I mean, if you are a person, if you do have ADHD, if you do have neurodivergence, if you've, if you're relating to any of that and you feel like this idea of like a lot of little things happening over the course of your life that were impactful, right? But that the world has taught you to be like, stop being a baby about it. Like it's no big deal. Like the world tells you that. And yet you're like, but it impacted me. You can't change it. And then you're encouraged to let that go. The only way out is through. I mean, you do have to walk through that stuff, right? So in order to let go, you got to walk through it. And it's hard work. It's really hard work. And it is a journey. It is a process. But I can certainly say, there have been times, especially people with ADHD, neurodivergence, we can have very addictive personalities. And there has been times where, despite having a love of psychology and this kind of personal growth and self-help world, there have been times where I feel almost like negatively addicted to it, where I can literally point to the books on I have so many books on my shelf about all this stuff, but I can literally point to the books on my shelf now that give me a bad feeling where I can be like, oh, that was a book I bought because I was so scared that I was broken that I felt like I needed to read that book versus a different self-help book that gives me a really positive feeling because it was like, oh yeah, I remember when I heard that podcast, I just loved that conversation they were having. And I just was so excited to read that person's book. Totally different feeling. They're both personal growth. They're both self-help, right? But what's the drive behind it? And I think letting go of that negative self-talk is the first step because that's such a driver for things that you might be holding on to, right? That you don't need in your life anymore. If I had been more mindful and aware in the moment and not letting my negative self-talk take over, that Kim, you're broken, there's something wrong with you. There's some books I probably wouldn't have bought. I bought because I was scared. Like I bought them because I thought somebody scared me into thinking I needed them. But, at the end of the day, they weren't actually my favorite. I wasn't actually just genuinely attracted to them. So there's learning to do that is truly a lifelong process. But I do think that there is probably a moment, like for a lot of people, where you kind of wake up, right? And something like this, right? So like, discovering for me, neurodivergence and ADHD was sort of this like aha moment where everything started making sense. And it was a catalyst for really slingshotting me into a lot of like integrating personal growth that I had never really been able to integrate down from my head into my body until the last like couple years.
Yeah, that is probably a place that I have just jumped into. I'm looking at the calendar now. I just actually realized today's my 29th and a half birthday. So I feel like each year throughout my 20s has been some sort of like awakening process in a different way, but definitely over the past year and a half, more of that has been more internally focused.
Yeah.
There were a lot of like good health habits that I awakened up to over my 20s, mindfulness habits. But yeah, definitely over the past year, it's been a shift into more of a like psychological analysis of myself.
Yeah.
And that's why I was actually really intrigued by the Myers-Briggs, because when I did get my result, I try not to look at those things like, oh, it's 100% who you are, but how can I use it as a tool to understand certain areas of my life where this may be showing up? There were just a lot of things that were described with my personality type that I thought showed up in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. No, the self-work is huge. And I'm excited. I mean, personally, again, back to the whole thing of how I felt anger upon kind of understanding my diagnosis. There is a feeling of like when you really do wake up to whatever it is, right, that you need to wake up to in your life, neurodivergent or not, right? When you wake up to that, there can be a sense of almost like, what the hell? I feel like the last 20 years of my life or the last 10 years of my life were robbed from me because I didn't understand this. And there's almost like a little bit of a, oh man, like if I had understood then what I know now, my life would be so different. And so then you start to kind of, there can be, you got to be careful not to go down those rabbit holes. But it's like there can be this kind of like wistful, like feeling of, man, like I wish somebody would have helped me sooner. And that's part of why I feel so passionate about parents. If you suspect that your kid's different or something's going on with them and you're looking into it, like, don't be afraid of the labels. Like, I completely understand the hesitation to want to label your kid. And you don't necessarily need to like label them or like tell them this is what you are or whatever, but to arm yourself with that knowledge. Had this been something that was not, for me, that was not swept under the rug and that was brought to my attention of like, yeah, Kim, like, we don't really know what totally is going on with you, but like, you are different. It's very clear that something is different between you and the rest of the kids. Like, I think that would have been such an important validation of how I knew I was already feeling inside of myself. And personally, I just believe that's the most important thing. Parents or any caretakers or friends, like around somebody, when someone's expressing to you, like, I feel different, like something is off, like listen to them and do your best to validate that. Because if somebody's insides don't match what they're getting on the outside, that's what creates the conflict and essentially small traumas, right? So that's where the empathy comes in, right? Of just believe people when they tell you that they feel different, that they're depressed, they have depression. I mean, the worst thing we can do is like, oh yeah, me too. Everybody feels like that. It's like, no, you might be talking to somebody that genuinely does feel this on such a deeper level than you've ever experienced. Like, we have to expand our imaginations a little bit more. Like, we really need to do better as a society of exercising our imagination that, hey, maybe what this person's telling me, just because I can't see it and there's no physical proof of it in front of my face other than them just telling me, like, we need to do better at believing them and imagining, what if this really is completely debilitating for them in a way that it's not for me? What must that be like? And find our compassion, because, things aren't going to get better for everybody unless we do that. It's just such an important first step.
I agree entirely. I know, turning this back into the awareness that I'm developing, I think I'm noticing, I'm aware of empathy. I feel empathy, but I recognize like there's moments in my life where this is a scenario where I need to be practicing and exercising more empathy, but there's something in me that's not doing that. There's something in me that's reacting and running away from it. And that's where I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, what work do I need to do on myself? What did I experience at some point in the past that made me say exercising this empathy is not safe or is harmful to me?
Yeah.
Does that connect?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because that's something that I have really dove into in the last few years as well. And I have found that the answer to that question is almost unanimously, if I find it whenever, I've been practicing empathy, like, cause I know, like, it goes back to the golden rule of like, treat other people the way that you'd love to be treated. Most of the time now, with a lot of practice, like, I have gotten better at doing that consistently. Every once in a while, some situation will arise with somebody that I find myself about to be very unempathetic or dismissive or something. And I notice it and I'm like, whoa, why am I having trouble in this situation? And I've noticed after clocking a bunch of those situations now, it's because that person is mirroring to me exactly something that I have not dealt with in myself. And it's the exact thing that they are expressing to me is something that I have not healed in myself. The exact same thing. So the answer is right in front of you. If you're running away from it, it's because that is the answer. Is whatever they're talking about is what is triggered in you is specifically what you need to deal with.
Yeah. And another example other than empathy is love, unconditional love. I am aware that this is a person who deserves that. There's something in me that's showing up in a way where I'm not giving them what they deserve. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, what that's a mirror then to me saying what in me feels like that response doesn't
Yeah,
warrant
totally.
unconditional love. And it's more
Yeah.
so something in me that I need to figure out
Yeah. Yeah.
to heal that.
Yeah. I mean, to bring it back to this, all this whole conversation, neurodivergence, ADHD, labels, in the beginning, you had mentioned that you maybe have suspected some of these things in yourself that like maybe, yeah, maybe I do have ADHD, but you suggested that you're kind of a little bit almost like allergic to like not wanting to take on that label. And I can say the same thing about, like my parents, like they did their best and they were curious and they noticed that, there were some different things going on with me, but ultimately it just wasn't something that they talked to me a lot about. They didn't proactively tell me about it because something in them was sort of similar. It feels like the same vibe, right? Something in them was similar to this thing in you that's telling them, no, labels are bad, or like, oh no, don't label it. But it's like, why?
Yeah.
What's there? So what is my difference? Deservingness to be labeled. Because if I'm different, then I'm different, right? If you're different, then you're different. But what's wrong with that? What negative narrative are we attaching to a label? Because I could just as easily say, gosh, if somebody had said to me back then, hey, you have ADHD, I could have been like, sweet. Now I have a roadmap for the rest of my life. Now I know exactly what it is that I'm dealing with. And I could have had a whole world of resources open up to me to help me quicker, faster to realize what was going on. And instead, I've just been sort of fumbling through with no guidepost of what was going on with me until I had to discover it and then realize it's been there all along. Right. So for me, for the person who's actually dealing with it, I would have loved, looking back, like, sure, I'm sure some kids would have been assholes about it, but they were assholes anyway. Right. They were already being that way to me. I would have been armed with some truth and some knowledge and, the ability to get through it. So yeah, it's like when we're adverse to those kind of things, it's like, well, what's so bad about saying I have ADHD? Like, what's so bad about that label? And just another person. I don't agree with the.
It gives somewhat of a light bulb going off my head. And I feel like I needed the entire 1 hour and 7 minutes of us discussing for that light bulb to go off. I feel like I'm in this weird space of, okay, a lot of my life I experienced labels that I never wanted assigned to me. So the space that I'm in now is like not labeling myself with anything, but it's like I could always like not identify with something, but I have the choice to choose who I want to be, who I want to be identified as. And it's
Right.
like I haven't really come to a decisive decision on that because it's like I'm trying to remove all these blocks before I do that. But it's like if I'm aware that I have a lot of symptoms of ADHD, I should just be comfortable to surrender to that and kind of use it
Yeah. Cause
as,
it is what it is. Right.
yeah.
I mean, and the thing, I mean, I say that also knowing that we just talked a little bit ago about how ADHD, that is absolutely, it is the most misleading name for a condition. Like it is so misleading. It is the most misleading named thing. So that is a negative aspect of labels is that they can be really misleading and they can also be really reductive. Attention deficit disorder, right? Attention is literally the tip of the iceberg when it comes to ADHD, right? There is so many other things involved in like the symptoms of ADHD, but to focus on that one thing is just silly. But I mean, so yeah, it can be negative, but it's like if you can get past that, if people can just, I know I talked about earlier being more imaginative and stretching your imaginations with empathy and compassion, but also just curiosity. It's like, if somebody tells you, gosh, I'm really struggling, I have like really terrible depression, or like my ADHD is really flaring up and I'm really having trouble with going to work lately, or whatever it is, right? Instead of immediately having that like skeptical look on your face in almost like in disbelief, because we're kind of reprogrammed to just automatically go there the way our society is, the way we talk to people these days, it's just so everything's so polarized. It's almost like an autopilot. We do it on accident. We really have to train ourselves out of it because we're missing like the flavor of life, right? We're missing all the gray area. that is where life actually exists and where connection exists. So if, people could just take themselves out of it and just pretend for a moment, like, what if I 100% believe this person, even though I can't see it? And even though there's no evidence that I'm used to having when somebody says, hey, there's something wrong or I'm struggling, even if that person doesn't look to me like they're struggling, which by the way is something people told to me all the time. When I would say, hey, I'm really struggling, I've got, my depression is really terrible right now. Like my anxiety is off the charts. Like I'm having, suicidal thoughts. Like a lot of times, like the first response I would get from people is, no, Kim, you're just being dramatic. Like you seem just fine. Look at you. You're always out there just being happy and cheerful. And it's like, yeah, that's a mask. But listen to me, they're so and I know they mean well. And these are people who I love dearly that like have been with me my entire life and have done amazing supportive things for me. So I know in my heart that they mean well, but that type of reaction is so unhelpful and scarring to people dealing with these like unseen challenges. So I'm for sure on a mission to bring some more light to that and hopefully help people see it a little bit differently and, not be so quick to jump to like dismissive language or reactions or even, hijacking reactions of like, oh, well, me too. It's like, no, you don't know that.
Yeah, I think about the times where people explain their feelings to me. I'm somebody who immediately tries to think of solutions based on how I've experienced certain things in the past, where it's like they have a completely different perception about what's going on than me, and they may need a completely different space of support than what I'm used to and what I need.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it makes me think I really got challenged recently with one of these moments where I was actually really proud of myself because I feel like I had a lot of self-awareness in the moment and all of my hard work felt like it paid off. But last year I lost my mother unexpectedly. It was very traumatic and very difficult for all the reasons that grief is difficult. And then recently, very recently, in fact, like maybe just a month or so ago, one of my really close friends unexpectedly lost her mother. And there was this natural moment where we reached out to each other, right? And it was like, obviously I'm like, oh my gosh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. Like there's all of that. It took everything in me. I almost did it, but I caught myself of being like, oh my God, I know how you feel. And that would be so understandable, right? If I had said that, because it's like, well, I just lost my mom. You lost your mom. That's so understandable of why, like, if of anybody, another person who's lost their mother would be the most qualified to say, I know how you feel. But even so, everybody's grief is different. I know how it feels to lose my mom. I don't know how it feels for her to lose her mom. We have different relationships with people. We have different, and yeah, sure. I'm sure we are going to get together and talk and there's going to be some similarities, but that is not an appropriate thing or comforting to her, right? She might understand a person saying, oh my God, honey, I know how you feel, but like, that's not going to help her. I know that from my own personal experience. Anytime somebody has said that to me, like, oh gosh, I know how you feel. And then they start telling their story. It's like, no, this is unhelpful.
That's the ego showing up whenever we start anything off with I, whereas in somebody going through that, it should all be about you deserve this. You are probably feeling things that I'm not feeling. How can I be of space to you? Even there, I use the word I, but that's something I try to be aware of. Yeah, but like whenever
it's a word, it's a word for a reason.
Whenever I'm beginning communication with I, even if I'm trying to mask that communication such in a way that I'm being there for the other person, there's still an ego being referenced and trying to be heard rather than there for the other person.
Well, and I would argue too, though, that it's fear, because ego is fear. A lot of that, right, is fear driven, and it's fear of, okay, if I put myself in the situation again with my friend, and like if I had said, oh my gosh, I know how you feel, it's this almost like anxious energy of, oh my goodness, like if I was really to sink down to how I really felt in that moment, I probably would be saying, like, if I spoke directly from my ego, I would be saying, I'm afraid. I don't know what to say to her. This feels terrible. I can't believe she's experiencing this also. I hope I don't say the wrong thing. I don't want her to feel alone.
I see.
And I'm afraid that for her to feel alone. And
I'm
so
afraid I can't be there for her. I'm afraid that
yeah.
she'll think I can't be there for
Mhm.
her. No, this is
Or I want her to think I'm a good
a good
friend or
example.
whatever, like all those things, or I'm afraid she's not going to think I'm a good friend if I don't say the right thing. And I think that this like connection and togetherness, the connection that we're trying to achieve when these like really terrible things happen and we're trying to be there for people, we forget like the easy way, the cop out connection is just to be like, oh, me too, as if to say, oh, yeah, I'm right there with you, like me too. But that's not actually togetherness, right? That's it. It's intuitively feels like maybe it should be, but it's not. It's like, no, actually sitting with them and letting them have their moment, but like making your presence known. But your presence is known just by being there. You don't have to tell them, oh, I'm there, right there with you. They see that you are focused on them. So yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in it, but really learning to let people have their experience and to accept that, again, like you mentioned, the ego, like getting out of that egocentric mindset of like, oh, everybody must experience things exactly the same way as I do. Like realizing that, like, no, absolutely nobody experiences anything exactly the same way as you do. And also, that's totally fine. And it's actually what makes the world cool and people interesting, right? So, yeah, having more imagination, faith that people are just being authentic and genuine with you when they share
Yeah,
will go a long
rewinding
way.
back to the experience you mentioned when you found out you're likely experiencing a late diagnosis of ADHD, neurodivergency. You
Yeah.
mentioned you grieved anger.
Mhm.
Was anger something that showed up a lot in your life prior to that time? And if so, were
Um,
you aware of how it was shown? Yeah, were you an angry person and were you aware of how it showed up? Right.
that is a wonderful question. That's a very interesting question too. I never thought of myself as an angry person. And yet I think, well, actually, I should say, I know the reason that I got so angry upon my diagnosis was because there was a little bit of this thing of all this now makes sense. And it almost felt like it gave me permission to finally release some of that anger because it made sense. Whereas before, the reason I never thought of myself as an angry person was because I was masking so hard. I didn't even see the anger that was actually inside of me, but there was.
Did it
There's a
show up?
lot.
Was there a specific region in your body where you noticed it showed up? Going back to like body keeps a score.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would get, I mean, it still happens. I also have an allergy. Sometimes I can't tell what the difference is, but I get flush. Like I get a flush reaction on my chest and I would get really, my throat would almost feel like it was constricting. Not like full blown, like I can't breathe, like an anaphylactic, nothing like that, like an allergy, but like I would get so tight. And I don't know if you're familiar with like chakras and all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff, but it's like, I'm not saying what I need to say. I'm not expressing what I need to express. And, if I think back to my childhood, there was a lot of control trying to happen. In terms of like, there was a lot of rules, there was a lot of, in my household, I remember there was just a lot of rules like, Kim, it's not appropriate to talk about this, or, oh, don't do this, don't say this, say that. There was a lot of this almost like micromanagement of my voice sometimes that I genuinely, probably not almost like it was like that. And that's how I experienced it. And that's no knock on, my parents. I mean, I'm sure they didn't realize that that's what they were doing. Or that that's how it affected me, but that is. So it just happened. But, everybody,
was yeah,
every
they were
parent,
doing the
every
best
parent
that they were given.
yeah, of course, of course. But I mean, that's how it manifested in me. And I could just feel, yeah, I could feel it. And even in relationships, it always shows up. And I think that I do believe, again, my opinion, but I've just seen it so many times in all of the interviews and podcasts that I've listened to, people that have come out and said I have ADHD and they talk about their neurodivergence. I don't think I've heard one interview where somebody did not say they struggled deeply with people pleasing. I really do believe that being neurodivergent and having, or having ADHD really turns people into it. It can very easily turn people into people pleasers because you're constantly getting negative feedback. You're constantly being told like, oh, you're being weird, or you're being too much, or you're not being enough, or and so you're like, and you just try to, in order to stop the noise, right? It's like at a certain point, you just are like, no, I can't hear this anymore. Like a person can only take so much, right? And so to mitigate that, you develop people pleasing tendencies. Now there's other types of trauma that can totally turn people into people pleasers as well. But this is one of them. And another thing I'll say for anybody who's relating to any of this and might want another little nugget, like a thread to pull on, is
please, I need it.
A really common thing in ADHD, which again is a chemical reaction. This is a chemical thing that happens. There's another fun acronym, RSD, rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, that is very commonly in people with ADHD. And I won't go into the science of it right now, but anybody can go look that up. But rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria is basically like a physiological overreaction to rejection or even perceived rejection. So like if you are talking to your boss and they send you an email, you're working on a project and they send you an email all out of the blue saying, hey, Clayton, can we meet tomorrow? I got something I want to talk to you about. If your body just all of a sudden goes, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. What the hell? Like, what's going on? Like, that is so common in people with ADHD. That's a reaction of rejection sensitivity disorder. This like hyper sensitivity to like oh no, what if I'm getting fired? Or, oh no, what if this person is criticizing me or rejecting me? What if this, and so not only does it make us people pleasers because we are desperately at all costs trying to avoid that physiological feeling, because most people might think in their head, oh, I wonder if I'm getting fired. Or I wonder if this is serious, or I wonder if this is about, but they don't feel it in their body. When that sort of thing happens to me, it's a physical feeling, that flush reaction that I talked about, instant. My whole chest and neck and everything just heats up and feels like it's growing hives, and I'm physically anxious and jittery and kind of feeling weak in the knees, or it'll feel like, if somebody says, oh God forbid a breakup, right? Oh, I don't want to be with you anymore. It's like a punch, like a literal punch to the gut. And, it sucks because there's a million reasons why then other people might want to protect you from that and then not tell you what they're really feeling because they perceive you as being too sensitive. So there's a lot to manage around it, but just knowing that it's something that, almost everybody with ADHD or neurodivergence has some version of that, and that it's normal. It's like, even though it still sucks to deal with, it's not going to stop the physiological reaction. At least I know what it is, and I know that I'm not alone, and I know that it's not just me, and that this is very explainable. It helps with the acceptance process and kind of getting through it and realizing that I don't need to be, so whacked out about it. And that's, or worried, and that's half the battle, really, of getting to a place where you can then develop whatever other coping mechanisms or habits that you need, like healthy habits to get around other aspects of ADHD, right? Or work with it instead of against it. So it's interesting. There's a lot there.
Yeah, this isn't my people pleaser coming out, but I'm definitely impressed with the immense amount of knowledge that you have done on all of this. It's definitely opening my eyes into a couple things that I'm stacking on my list of things that I should be aware of and consider, and I guess be mindful of as I continue this lifelong journey of understanding how I operate.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. I guess ironically or unironically, the funniest thing to me about all this is like, even just the fact that I do soak up this knowledge and that I am so focused on, I don't know, like just reading all these books, like listening to all these podcasts, like gaining all of this knowledge, like collecting it all. It was just even more proof to me that I had ADHD, because it was like, oh, when you are hyper interested in something, when your interest is there and it's true and it's genuine, that is when people with ADHD just find their sweet spot in life, right? Because they're so interested in it that then it's like the dopamine kicks in just for that thing, unfortunately, but it kicks in and it makes you so hyper focused that that's where, I mean, I feel like rabbit hole is such a widely used term in the ADHD community. Everybody knows what you mean when you say, oh, I went down a rabbit hole. It's like a true rabbit hole. Most people will say, oh yeah, I went down a rabbit hole and I learned about this thing for a few minutes one day. But it's like, no, no, no. When an ADHD person goes down a rabbit hole, it can literally last for like a full 24 hours and you forget to eat, which by the way, is an actual scientific thing. When you are flooded with dopamine and you're in a hyper-focused state, which is the science of ADHD, when you are in a hyper-focused state, the other mechanisms in your body that tell you you're hungry, you're thirsty, you're tired, you need to sleep, literally turn off. They turn off. That doesn't happen for other people. That doesn't happen for neurotypical people. So, art is one of my hyper-focus areas. And there have been many times in my life where I have had to take long breaks from painting because I know that once I start painting, this will happen to me. And it doesn't matter how many alarms I set. It doesn't matter when I tell myself I need to go to bed. I won't hear anything. I will be at my canvas for 20 hours straight and then finally finish it, back up, and then look around and think that it's only like 6 p.m. and it's like 5 a.m. And I didn't even eat dinner. I haven't drank any water in 10 hours. It's like, it's not healthy. So
Yeah, it
until I can
sounds
figure out.
manic, like in a
Yeah.
state of mania.
Yeah.
I can definitely resonate with that.
Yeah. It's a wild time.
I think back to a couple of moments in my life where I felt like that showed up. Jumping into the painting that you do, when did that hobby or profession come about? When did you start to get really serious about using painting as a way to express yourself?
Honestly, that was, I think that was actually one of the other ways that my parents, that this is one of the examples that they use of like why they tell me they knew I was different, because apparently this started when I was 2 years old. I was at nursery school. So, with a bunch of babies and here too. And I actually do remember the assignment. I remember our teacher, there was like this piece of paper and it had a sentence on it. I mean, I couldn't read at the time, but she told us what it said. It said, when I grow up, I want to be and then there was a blank. And so she was like going around to all the little kids and asking them what they wanted to be, to anybody that could actually answer. Cause like, again, we're like, this is a group of like 1 to 4-year-olds. And I said, artist, I want to be an artist. So she wrote it in there. And then we were just supposed to color the rest of the time. And I drew an incredibly intricate picture of myself, and the teacher showed my parents afterwards, and they're like, she drew a coherent picture. She's 2 years old. None of the other kids can like barely even hold a crayon and make a stick figure at best, or anything other than scribbles. Here I am, and I drew a 3D body, like a picture of myself wearing a dress. And the dress was I remember my parents, they kept it. So I mean, I've seen it since then, but it's like, I thought I drew it when I was like 5. They were like, no, you were 2. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, that would freak me out if I was a parent too. So they just put me in art classes and they're like, well, this is clearly something you're interested in. And so it's really always been a part of my life in terms of being like, quote unquote serious with it. I've always played with that throughout my life of trying to push it. I mean, I technically do have a website right now where people can buy my art, but that's like the most I've ever, gone forward with it. And even then, like when I got into marketing of it, I didn't like the way it felt. I felt like, it really dropped in for me how much of a coping mechanism it's been for my whole life, and just how good it made me feel, and how maybe this is something that it's actually just for me. I don't love, like if people want to look at my art and be like, oh, I like your paintings, I'd be like, cool, great. But it also invites a lot of people who feel like they want to tell you what I should be doing with my talent, right? And that part gets hard for me. That's where it starts to feel like my coping mechanism maybe is starting to get stolen. And so I've got this weird kind of like lean in, lean out relationship with art where I'm still trying to find that balance, but it's cool.
I know when we talked the first time, I know when we talked the first time, inauthenticity came up when we were talking about how some people project themselves on social media, their websites, through their art, through their passion projects. I definitely connect a little bit with what you said when it comes to just even creating this podcast. So there's a part of me that wants it to be seen by people who need to hear what you just talked about over the past hour, but at the same time, I don't want it to be seen for all the wrong reasons. And it's like, how do I express that in a way that is authentic to my true vision?
Yeah.
So I guess with that little spiel, what does authenticity mean to Kim?
Oh, that's one of my core, authenticity, vulnerability, those are like my top two core values as a person. I actually did an activity about that like a couple of years ago, and I was like, yep, those are my top two. I guess, well, in context of kind of what you were just speaking about in terms of social media, I mean, I believe authenticity is, I don't believe it's manufactured. I don't believe that it's ego driven. I believe that it is something that people could potentially criticize me for, coming on this podcast and talk.
Let them.
I know, let them, right? I love that theory too. Mel Robbins, caller. So, but yeah, I know people could criticize me for being like, well, but you're on a podcast and you're talking about this stuff. You obviously like want to talk about it. You want some kind of recognition. And it's like, well, actually, I'm not going to lie, like recognition for all the work I've put in to studying this stuff and figuring it out. Like, it's not like I'm going to say no to that. It does feel good. But like, actually, for me, it's more of a process of self-discovery. Like, I don't have anything to sell right now.
I don't want to cut you off, but there is actually something that makes me think that actually the right recognition is extremely valuable and not seen enough today. I was just listening to somebody talk about the karmic cycle and how every decision or action we do has consequences that go way beyond us. So you know how the pendulum with a couple balls on it. So somebody gives you recognition. That is going to, let's just say you're the second ball in the cycle. It's not just, you aren't the only consequence of that recognition, because them giving that to you is going to push that recognition down to other people. And the last ball is going to feel it the most when it like swings. Somebody giving you the right recognition is going to carry along to other people down the cycle.
Sure.
So that's what I thought about. And of course, on the other side, there's negative consequences when we put out the wrong energy.
Totally.
And circling back to talking about personality types. I mean, the one thing, I'm an ENFJ, and I think one thing that I discovered about ENFJs is they fear being wrong. So coming out of this podcast, I feel like I would be in a position like you. It's like, oh, I've done all this research on stuff, but it's like, please fact check everything I'm saying, because I would hate to tell you something and it be completely wrong. So when I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, I can't tell you how many times I like communicate with other people and let that impact my confidence, because I'm afraid of being wrong. If I come from a place of like good intentions, then let me be wrong. It's okay.
Well, and to you, kind of how we were talking about mirroring before, like what do we shy away from, or like what do we have trouble like sitting with, like in empathy, if we have a hard time giving empathy, it's the same way with this. It's like if I mean, because you heard me say like, oh, fact check me, I'm not a guru. The reason I feel the need, I mean, if I'm being totally honest and vulnerable, the reason I feel the need to say that is because I hate gurus.
Yeah.
I hate, like, don't lie. Like, I don't like when I'm online and I'm watching people's content, and, it's hard because I can't really pin it on a specific thing that they say, right? It's not, they say a bunch of things that are all technically correct, but there are people who say things with such confidence and like fortitude. They just make statements as complete fact, when in reality they should have tacked on, well, in my opinion, in the before they said what they said. But instead, there's a lot of people out there that just say, this is how it is. This is the truth. And it's actually, no, that's the truth of your opinion, but it's not fact. And those are, and a lot of times, like, those people are also trying to sell something. And so then you start mixing in this vibe of like, okay, you're trying to sell me a story because you're literally trying to sell me something. And then it becomes this icky kind of feeling. I mean, I suppose I'm trying to sell my art, but I honestly don't really care. I do it for myself. If people want to go to my website and see it and they like it and buy something, great. But like, I would,
kbatesart.com,
yeah,
unofficial
yeah,
sponsor of this episode.
gayratesr.com. But I mean, the thing is, I found my thing where, like, talking to you, talking to other podcast hosts, like, this subject is just deeply important to me. And in the last few years, I truly have stumbled on, for me, the truth of, like, when people ask you that question, like, when you're trying to find your purpose in life and people ask you, like, what would you do if you knew you were never going to make any money? Like, what would you do for free? What would you all, like, keep doing for free? Even if you knew, because you love it so much, even if you knew that you'd never get paid. This is it for me. This is it. I love having important, deep, interesting conversations with people where we both learn from each other. And also, I do get very passionate about things. And when I make discoveries in my own life of like things that had like a deep, deep impact on me, and I realize like, wow, sharing this story could really help somebody. Like, knowing that is what gets me here. I don't care. Like, I don't even know how you even make money from doing podcasts. That's not something that I personally understand a whole lot about, or getting paid to speak. I know it happens, like, people do it out there. If that's my future, that'd be pretty sweet. But like, I would keep doing it even if that never happened. And for me, that's authenticity. That's true. Like, I would genuinely keep showing up and doing these because I care about that. And so I think I can't judge other people. We all have them, we're on social media, we're watching some influencer, and we just have, that gut feeling of like, I wonder if this person would be talking about this product right now if they weren't being paid to do it. There's just a feeling of that. And integrity and authenticity being my core values, like, it's almost physical. Like, even if I wanted to, I don't think I'm physically capable of promoting something that I don't believe in, that is not genuinely something that has made a difference for me, or that I've tried, that I believe. I just can't do it. Yeah. Like, I can't. So, and then that's not to knock those influencers, like, that can just be on their own speaking into the camera without, being in conversation with another person, because there is many of them that I follow that have been wildly helpful for me, but that's their way, right? And they have figured out for them that that's the way that works for them, and that's the way that they can show up authentically. I have a hard time showing up authentically if it's just me trying to like force myself to be like, well, I got to make another post today about my art, and I got to try to get people to give a crap about the meaning behind this painting over here. It's like, for me, that doesn't work. If it works for other people, awesome. So, that's where I'm at. But I do actually think, I don't know, this is a little weird, I guess, fun fact about neurodivergence and ADHD. One of the kind of really interesting through lines that I've heard on a lot of the interviews that Alex Partridge does with his guests, they all seem to have like there seems to be a very deep sense of like fighting for the underdog and advocacy and fairness. Like, a lot of people, like, the idea of like if I saw somebody even walking down the street, if I saw somebody getting taken advantage of or some kind of injustice happening, it fires me up to a level that it will be very hard for me to not step in or say something, or, and I'm trying to manage that so I'm not being inappropriate and stepping into other people's business. But it's really, I get fired up over injustice very easily. And that's not to say that neurotypical people don't, but it seems to be, a through line with the neurodivergent people that it's extra to a point where they have a hard time not participating. Yeah.
So we touched on authenticity. You mentioned integrity, vulnerability, any other standout values that you saw before my next question?
Oh my God. I mean, vulnerability.
Yeah. authenticity and
I mean,
creativity are top three for me. So,
oh yeah, creativity. But I think you were right before when you said, like, there's a lot of things we got to deal with and we got to kind of look inward for to unlock creativity, right? And I just think, I don't know if it's resilience or persistence, but
I feel like I've
persistence.
mentioned resilience and persistence. I feel like I've mentioned this book on the podcast before. Julia Cameron, The Artist Way.
Oh yeah,
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 yeah, yeah. She was the one who opened up the idea to me that like creativity's abundantly in us. It's just being blocked by everything we cover it up with that we
yeah, yeah.
experience outside of ourselves.
And just untrue stories that we tell ourselves. Like, I don't know why this is such a weird, silly thing to get pissed off about, but my entire life, okay, because my artistic talents show themselves at a really young age and it was very noticeable, right? My family and family friends, people around me, whatever, like I kind of, got dubbed like artist or artsy, whatever, was one of the labels that just got stuck to me really early on. And, so that was something I was reduced to a lot, right? It was like, Kim, it's Kim. She's the artist or she, whatever. Anyway, whenever people would find out, this is so strange to me. Whenever people would meet me for the first time, the conversation would go a little bit like that. It was wild how many times it happened. They'd be like, cool, you're an artist? I'd be like, yeah, 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 totally. They'll be, oh, crazy. I can't even draw a stick figure. That response, oh, that's awesome. I can't even draw a stick figure. I'm not creative. The things people would say about themselves, well, I'm not creative at all, or I can't, I'm not artsy at all, or I'm
That's
not
their
artistic at all.
stereotype of what art is defined as: drawing,
Yeah.
painting.
And it's like, that is, I mean, forget just stick figure, but or they'd say, I can't even draw a straight line. And like, I have developed over the years many little witty comeback, like clapbacks at that. But it's like, yeah, there's not a whole lot of art that I'm into that has any straight lines in it, as far as I know. Like, like it just silly things. Like, it's this, what a narrow view of art. What a narrow, narrow, narrow view of art. Or who knows? Like maybe they thought that was a compliment, but even a narrow view of a compliment, of somebody's idea of a compliment is comparing me to them and their ability or inability to do something like that has not like that's so out of context. And I just, yeah,
It
for a
makes me think
while.
like if somebody said, "Oh, you're a podcaster," I can't even imagine getting on the mic when this entire conversation was me saying, stuttering, not even being able to say complete sentences at times because I had this image in my head of what I wanted to say and couldn't even spit it out. But
Yeah.
there's like so
Yeah.
much imperfection in what
Yeah.
goes into this.
Well, yeah, like art is just a giant blob of imperfection. Like that's what it is. But it's, yeah, I don't know. It's just such a narrow view. And I was on a hot thread about that for a while where I was just, on my soapbox telling people like, no, like everybody is an artist. Everybody is like, that was one of the things, almost like an injustice. Like I felt like that was almost an injustice in itself of people saying that about themselves. Like, no, everybody's an artist. Everybody is creative. Even somebody who's an accountant and is in spreadsheets all day and they're doing numbers, they're creative with numbers. They're creative with the way they set up the spreadsheet. They're creative with the way they solve a problem with those numbers. That's creativity. That is art. Like we are creating things all the time, every day. It drives me nuts when people cut off that side of themselves or they tell themselves that story because they're just cutting themselves off at the knees. It's just so, it's just so sad.
I wish I would have introduced you as an artist. I think it definitely came up in my episode with Sasha, but I really think I've been struggling with introductions because I'm also at a space in my life where, I continue to introduce people based on the conditioned way of, what do you do? Tell me what you do and let's use that as a means to identify you. Whereas in like,
Yeah.
I'm in this space now of like, who are you being? And I
Like
think,
really, yeah.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. Like, and how can I introduce you based on something not tied into an achievement, an accomplishment? I don't know. How should I do that?
I've been thinking a lot about that too for myself, right? And I think lately I have finally, well, it's funny because you go back to the beginning of this podcast and even I introduced myself as a little bit of a what I do, right? I
Yeah.
said a creative and marketing leader. And it's like, yes, that's what I do. And it was a little bit right because I said creative. But like I said, authentically trying to, I care a lot about going on these podcasts. I care a lot about, spreading knowledge. And I have different archetypes to me. Like, I think archetypes would be an incredible way to introduce people, because if I look at my archetypes, like what I really resonate with, like what every single thing I do in my life, like what I feel most passionate about, everything fits into a few words: philosopher, artist, detective, and advocate. Those four things pretty much encapsulate all of the passion that I have. And even, my creative and marketing work as part of my career, they fit into that. I am a marketer who goes to work for companies that are selling products that I genuinely believe in. I have left companies before that had me working on creative and marketing for products that I felt were contributing to the disease of America, that were, products that were not healthy, or that I felt were unethical, or that were inauthentic, that were like kind of trying to pull some
I
smoke and
understand.
mirrors. Like, I have
Definitely.
left companies that did that, because I was like, I tell people all the time, like I started my career doing branding and design for alcohol and wine labels. And that's one. And then, I went into consumer packaged goods that was like more food and products and different things. But when I tell people, and then I went into biotech and pharma, and then I did all these things. And it's funny because when I tell people all those different industries I was in, and then they guess which one was the one I left because I felt it was unethical, they guess alcohol, because like, oh, alcohol's bad, right? And I'm like, no, that was the most ethical one. That was the most ethical, because they weren't lying about what they were. Everybody knows alcohol's bad. They weren't putting stuff on the outside of an alcohol bottle. They weren't telling us to write, this is healthy, there's 0 calories in this, this is natural. It's like, no, it's alcohol, and we're not lying about that. So instead, we're just going to make the bottle pretty and put a big warning on the back saying, this is bad for you, right? But if you buy it, look at this pretty label. And it's like, well, that was actually the most ethical, type of product that I work for. So, yeah. I mean, I care about like unearthing that stuff. And I would say detective, because I love learning and figuring things out. So instead of saying learner or teacher, it's specifically like figuring out puzzles. And, whether I'm the puzzle of like, ooh, I'm having this weird physical reaction to something, or I'm having this emotional thing, like figuring that out. I love figuring things out. And that is something that will easily put me into a rabbit hole. My sensitivity to injustice and having these like very, very strong, passionate feelings about advocacy for underrepresented groups, or people that need their voices to be heard. And also an advocate for myself, like come into my own in the last few years for various reasons. And even just this kind of, I would say, tour, right? I guess, of going on podcasts is like my way of like doing something nice for me and like unblocking my throat chakra, as we talked about earlier. It's like, I want to see how much I can build the habit of being unashamed of what I had to say. Anybody who may have taught me to be ashamed or wary of what I had to say, or, taught me that, oh no, keep quiet. You shouldn't talk about these things, or that's taboo, or this is taboo. Like, I feel like I am on a mission to just blow that out of the water and prove to myself that was bad advice. That was not true. And I trust myself more than that, right? Now I do. Now I trust myself more than that to be positive, but it's still new for me to go out, put it into practice. So, that's what I'm getting out of it.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
Are there any
Yeah.
affirmations that you tell yourself every day?
I heard speaking of Mel Robbins, I heard such a good one. And not really an affirmation, but it's like a question you can ask yourself. But the one I've had written on my mirror for a really long time is, what feels good? I've just had that question written, and it came up for me during this time where I realized, oh my gosh, I've been masking for most of my life. I was so sensitive to all of the judgment and criticism that comes with being me as like a neurodivergent person, and that I really made myself really small, and I made myself into something that other people wanted me to be, not on purpose. It just happened. And I went into autopilot for a long time and wasn't even fully aware of it. And it's not that I was never doing anything that felt good, that I liked, but I wasn't enjoying that stuff through the lens of actually me, who I was. I was trying to enjoy it through the lens of other people looking at me. So I was still doing it in a certain way. And so I'm kind of like trying to rediscover all of my hobbies right now and let myself rediscover who I really am without the lens of others on top of that, without worrying about what other people are going to think of what I'm doing or what I'm saying.
It sounds like you
And
were a
just,
little bit numb to what felt bad.
yeah, well, or I was numbing to the things that felt bad. But yes, 100%. No, that's spot on. Because I won't say you, because I don't know about other people, but I definitely made myself numb to that after a while because it was just too hard to look at. But now that it's not, it's been a really nice, it's been a really nice journey, kind of reacquainting myself with, old hobbies and being like, wait, did I really like that? Did that really feel good? Or even friendships, relationships, like, does this feel good or is this actually not good for me anymore? Does this not work for me? And reassessing all of that. And some things stick and some things have fallen away and other things completely new have popped up into my life that I never expected. So that's been really cool.
Well, I'm glad the Making Insight podcast was one of them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You have no idea. Well, you kind of do because I told you before, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's been really fun. And it's just,
I
I'm
have a couple
excited.
more and then we'll wrap up, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course.
I also
Sure.
noticed you're an Aquarius sun.
I am.
Okay. How deep into the astrology rabbit hole have you traveled?
I have traveled fairly deep into that rabbit hole. I am certainly not as versed on it as many people that I have met, but yeah, yeah. How about you?
It's funny. I say that same thing and then like I'll start to talk astrology with people and they're like, whoa, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, wow, I feel like I barely brushed the surface. Like when I bring up
Yeah.
a house or something like that, it's like, oh, I only know my sun sign.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
or people will respond back to me like, oh, I only know my sun sign. So
What is yours, by the way?
I am a rising Aries, Leo sun. I am filled with water and fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I am nearing the end of my Saturn return in the 11th house. So I know the
Okay.
11th house, and that's why I feel like the entire past year and a half has been filled with depth into my own internal being, my own sense of spirituality and connection there.
Well, it sounds like you might actually know more than I do. I usually, when people ask me that question, I say, well, I think I know quite a bit, but like, what do you know? And then they say, oh, my sun sign. And then I'll be like, okay, my first question is always, do you know what a rising and a moon sign is? And if they say yes, then I'm like, okay, now we can start talking about that. But I do, yeah, I do. What is it? So I'm an Aquarius sun, my rising is Sagittarius, and my moon is Virgo. So I've got air, earth, and fire going on.
Yeah, I treat astrology a little bit like personality tests. I try to take what's relevant and what could astrology be mirroring back to me that's present in my life, whether it be
Yeah.
in the past, present, or future. What do I need to be aware of? I don't need to necessarily let my sun sign define me. What's showing up in the sun sign that is showing up in my life currently, and is it positive? Is it overused? Is it underused? Actually, an astrologist is one that I would really like to have on the podcast because
Awesome.
everything I
Yeah, yeah,
know
yeah.
about it has just been what I've dug into myself. And actually, what made me look into astrology even more was when somebody shared with me the astrological map. So there's
Uh-huh.
certain places around the globe that the planets were positioned in when you were born and they were traveling in a certain direction, or
Right.
there's a certain rotation around the earth that planet could have significance in a geographical region. And I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, moved to Cleveland, Ohio shortly after. But that
Mhm.
my Jupiter sign goes straight through Cleveland, Ohio. And the
Okay.
description of my Jupiter sign has so many similarities into my experience here and kind of what's keeping me here
Wow.
at the moment.
That's
And then
interesting. That's so cool.
I feel extremely connected and drawn to Hawaii. I mean, I know Hawaii's a place where like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, how can you not love Hawaii? It's just like there's something about the culture there, and not even the culture, but just certain places in Hawaii where I feel deeply drawn to. And
Yeah.
there's like three lines going straight through uh Honolulu, Oahu, and Kauai, and
Very
Yeah.
cool.
So every time I go there, it's just something I think about. And the
Oh my gosh, I
messages,
might need.
sorry, but the messages that have shown up in those signs too, in those planets that cross through, that kind of happen there. So
Yeah, yeah. I might need to. Gosh, I might need to show you just show me about these lines so I can figure out physically on Earth where I'm supposed to be. That stuff fascinates me.
definitely,
I love that. I love that.
yeah.
I did hear a really sweet, I mean, this is very high level, but there was some video on social media I saw the other day where this woman seemed to be some kind of astrology expert, but she was talking about all the signs in context of like what they're here to teach us. And Leo, I remember mine, and I do remember Leo. She said Leos are here to teach us how to shine. They're very good at shining. They're very good at, taking that center stage and just putting themselves out there. And it has nothing to do, I remember she said it has nothing to do with whether you're good at it or not. But they put themselves out there. And so they teach people. And that in itself is very bright and aspirational. And it teaches other people how to shine.
I actually feel appreciation hearing that, because part of this podcast is me putting myself out there, but my whole goal in putting myself out there is to put other people out there more than it's getting people to come on and have conversations with this, whether it's something they're extremely specialized in or extremely interested in. And I also see that showing up in all these personality tests I'm taking.
Yeah.
You know, the ENFJ is the teacher, the mentor. So similar to Leo, the lion, the leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. No, because I know I wanted to tell you that because I would totally reflect to you that I feel that from you. And I know even just like things that you had shared to me before this conversation about, your own journey of personal growth and like what you're working on. And this is, this podcast and what you're doing is a manifestation of that. And like just doing it, it's very inspiring, and
Thank you.
very cool to see you doing it.
Like
Yeah.
what you said earlier on what you could do until the day you die if you weren't getting paid. This is it, at least for me
Cool.
now. And I'm always aware that could change. And going back to astrology, like I know I'm a Leo sun in the fifth house, and fifth house, I think, is all about expressive creativity. And
Yeah.
so this is kind of that outlet for me.
I love it. I love that.
One last question, and then we'll
Yes.
send it off
Yeah.
until the next one. So what do you love most about who you are?
Oh my God. I'm gonna have to get gooey.
I almost started the podcast with that question.
That is, I wish this wasn't such a hard question. Such a hard
Take all the
question for
time you
me.
need. If you need a minute, I
Because
can
yeah, no,
clip out
it's funny
that
because,
time.
and I have to I want to say like this is not a hard question for me because I'm in my head being like, oh my God, there's so many things I can't pick. It's not. It's no, it's like I've struggled with like saying things out loud that I'm like, oh, I actually really like this about myself. I think
Coming from an overthinker,
well,
don't overthink it.
oh,
First
I'm a
thing that
total
comes to my
overthinker.
mind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know. I'm a total overthinker. There's maybe kind of two. They might be sort of related. So that's why I'm kind of overthinking it. But I think like there's one where I know that I'm going to say this the wrong way, but I know I have the ability to be like life of the party, but I don't mean that in like an attention way. It's more like if I'm in the right headspace, I have noticed that my energy aura, whatever you want to call it, has the potential to be very, very powerful and change people's mood for the better. If I am I mean, oh man, lately especially it's been happening is like I get on it and I'm in such a good mood because I feel like I'm aligning more with myself. And the more that I get in alignment with myself and what I really want to be doing, I just tend to walk into a room with such a different energy. And not that that can't happen for everyone, but like when I pair that with my extroversion and this newfound voice and not filtering myself as much, there's this new person that's coming out that is so powerful in such a positive way. And I am like falling in love with that person. I miss her. I think I used to be that person when I was a little kid before, trauma and all the things happened, but I'm coming back to that. And I love that. And the reason I said the other one's a little bit related is that I have never loved small talk. I don't like it. I hate it. Whether I'm meeting up with friends or I'm one-on-one with somebody that I just met or I'm on a first date or whatever, like I love, despite many people in my life telling me the opposite, like to not do this, I love that I have refused to stop going deep immediately. Like I love that I go deep with people fast. I love that I can get there. And for the most part, maybe not every single person I've ever met, but I feel like for the most part, I've made people feel comfortable going to that place with me far faster than they've ever gone before. And that's feedback that I've gotten. That's some of my favorite. It's like my favorite thing when somebody just, says to me like, wow, that I can't believe we just had that conversation. Like that was like what you said was so insightful, or that was so deep, or I don't know, like not like calling me smart, but like helpful.
To me, what I've been
It means
feeling
everything.
most, or what I feel most during like surface level conversations, is inauthenticity and people pleasing and conditioning. That's what shows up. I have mastered the art of having surface level conversations, but I truly would rather pass them up. And I'm not perfect in this. People who may listen to this and be like, I just had one with you last week. I totally agree with you. And this podcast is helping. Whenever I can ask people questions like the one I just asked you about, like, what do you love so much about who you are? Asking that to people who maybe I'm meeting for the first time, or I don't know. It lights me up, and it also is rooted in a deep curiosity in what other people are experiencing and driving works.
So juicy, right? It's like the juiciest kind of conversations start with the juiciest questions, like really hard questions or just really deep questions, like where a person is like, man, like you're going to get to know something pretty important. I love that. I love that. Especially, if you're a person who's grown up with people telling you, oh, don't do that. Don't ask those questions. That's not nice, or that's too much, or that's too prying. That's not appropriate. It's like, then there's almost something, even though maybe that's not true. And maybe that other person was over indexing on being careful or tiptoeing or people pleasing or tiptoeing around others. Like there is something a little bit like that oppositional defiance kind of fun, where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do something naughty then right now and like ask you this question I'm not supposed to ask you. It's fun. It's just fun. Yeah. Yeah. I totally get that. Wait, what's your answer?
Oh, geez. I was just about to say I need to be careful. I know. I was like, I need to be careful asking these, because if they're turned on me, I'm like, oh.
I do that all the time, though. I ask people questions that I am not prepared to answer at all, but I love it. It's so fun.
Don't overthink it. What do I love about myself? What is the first thing that comes to mind? I am so fascinated in, it's hard not to overthink.
I love this.
I love my daydreaming. I love my visionary mindset. I love my curiosity. I love my desire to figure out people. And I am a person. So I am just as much a part of people as people are a part of me.
Great. I love this.
I think I love connection. And I say that also from a place of imperfection. Like, I am not always the best at connecting with others, but I have a deep, deep passion and desire to not only connect with others, but to be a connector for others, whether it be connecting you with somebody I know who I know that energy may flow greater than ours. I know I'm going to listen back to this recording when I finish the editing. I'm going to listen to this episode and I'm going to maybe even think of things that I'm not even thinking about right now.
Well, that's the beauty of it, right? Even as you were talking, I thought of more things I loved about myself, and I was like, oh my God, well, that's cool. I should like practice this. It's rewiring the negative self-talk that most of us have.
I think ultimately I love that I wake up every day being a student. And I truly see that in a lot of the guests that I've had coming onto the podcast, including you. And I was going to say this earlier, but your ability to come on here and talk about these things, I think what I see in you is like the detective is really a student. You're really just trying to go deep into all these things to make yourself better. And eventually you hit a point where sharing them is going to help others, where there may be a population of others who it just goes in one ear and out the other. But yeah, just being a student.
I don't know if this is not unsolicited advice. It's just something that you just made me think of. It's just something I feel like I've learned that really has sunk in the last like 6 months for me. When you are that, like when you are that personality type, that archetype, when you are truly a person who's just, you are the student, you are the teacher, you are usually teachers, the student and teacher is just two sides of the same coin, right? But when you are that archetype, those people tend to deal with imposter syndrome the most because it's this weird paradox, but it's so true. The more you learn, the more you know, the more you go down a rabbit hole of some subject matter that you deeply are interested in, you want to know, and you want to know about, the faster you realize and the more you realize you don't know anything. Because as soon as you open a door to like, okay, I'll just use the ADHD thing. It's like, okay, I want to learn about ADHD. And I start reading all these books and and I listen to like countless, like truly countless. I don't even know how many podcasts I've listened to and different experts talking about it and all the books I've got in my Audible. Like, I feel like my Audible reading list would scare the shit out of people. But it's like, the more I do, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know, because you just learn about how much more there is still out there that I haven't read yet,
100%.
that I don't know. And yet it's hard to remind yourself. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I was like, okay, Kim, when is it ever going to be time to put yourself out there then and just like start helping people with what you do know? And that's part of the getting over the perfectionist part too, right? Is like recovering from that is like, when is it going to be time? Just start getting out there and doing it. Because the truth is, there's always going to be people who know more than me, the experts that have read and listened to more podcasts than me. But there's plenty of people out there who have read and listened to way less. And so here I am, right? So I think that that's interesting, but I do believe it gets harder. Like, quite literally, with every new book I read, the difficulty of putting myself out there, it becomes more and more difficult because I'm trying to hold space for all of this information and not get it wrong and not mislead people, but just be like, all right, what am I really here for? I'm really just feeling very passionate about how big of a deal people's stories have made for me in my life. Like the podcast that I fell asleep listening to when I woke up and it was about ADHD, it was a solo podcast of her telling her own story. So every episode was through her lens of her story. It was just somebody telling her story. And it just happened to resonate with me and make something click that then opened this door for me. I remember when I first got into yoga for like over a year, and I don't even know how many yoga classes. There was this one simple pose, crow pose, if anybody knows it. I don't know, whatever.
Did it
but
last night.
It's slightly advanced, but not really. It's like just starting to get into something that's a little bit more advanced, and then you start doing it. I was trying for so long to figure out that pose. And I had been to so many different classes, where the teacher would explain how to get into it. And they all had their own way of explaining how to get into that pose. And one day, because of the way that this one particular yoga instructor explained it, all of a sudden I was able to do it. And I've been able to do it ever since, just because of that one person saying it the way they said it. And there's been countless moments like that for me in my life where, because of the way somebody said something, it suddenly clicked. And if I could give that to somebody by talking about things the way that I talk about things, whatever that means, then awesome. Like, awesome. So excited about that. So I don't know. Most of the reason I even gave you my website and my Instagram handle is because I'm like, oh, if anybody wants to DM me and wants to talk about like ADHD and neurodivergence, like I love connecting with people and helping people out if they want resources. So I'm all about it. And then it was like, oh yeah, I guess my art's on there too, but you can go look at that too, see what neurodivergent art looks like. But I would argue most art's probably neurodivergent, but that's a whole other thing.
I am willing to let that happen. It will be sure.
But yeah, this has been awesome.
I think that could be a great way to end. Is there anything anything else that you think should be spoken into this ether before we sign off and say peace?
Oh my God, I could go forever.
I
It'd
get
be super easy. It'd be super easy.
I will simply just say that I'm grateful for the 2.5 hours of time that you have dedicated to being on this podcast, where it's very possible 0 people listen, or it's very possible 2 or 10 people listen, but it is a
You never know.
critical step in my own personal growth and development in helping me become who I want to be. So, yeah.
Awesome. Same. Thank you for dedicating 2.5 hours to helping me, because I know that was a big thing for both of us, but I really do appreciate it.
And Robin Wilkie, I am testing you to see if you listened all the way through this episode. I thank you as well for creating this connection.
Absolutely. Yay. My Robin. Oh. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I appreciated this. And like, I love your podcast. I think you're having awesome conversations with people. And I appreciate your curiosity. And honestly, if I was to say anything to anybody, that would be it, is like, be more curious. The world would be a better place if people were just more genuinely curious about things and people.
Thank you. You're welcome. And likewise.